In the vast cosmos where civilizations rise and fall like waves against cosmic shores, where ancient empires span thousands of star systems and technology reaches beyond mortal comprehension, there exists a universal truth that chills even the most hardened galactic veterans to their core. Never underestimate the species that calls itself human. They didn't conquer through superior firepower. They didn't dominate through ancient wisdom or technological supremacy. They didn't even mean to become what they are today. But somehow, this young species from a small blue planet in an unremarkable solar system managed to do something that no other race in galactic history had ever accomplished. They made the entire universe afraid. Not afraid of their weapons, though those became legendary. Not afraid of their ships, though they redefined space warfare. The universe became afraid of something far more terrifying: human unpredictability, their refusal to follow the established rules of galactic civilization, and their disturbing tendency to turn impossible situations into victories through sheer, inexplicable stubbornness. This is the story of how humanity accidentally became the bogeyman of the galaxy, and why even the most powerful alien empires now whisper one phrase in their darkest nightmares: the humans are coming. What you're about to read will challenge everything you think you know about galactic politics, interspecies warfare, and the true nature of fear itself. Because sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones who don't even realize they're monsters at all. The Galactic Council chamber hummed with the quiet efficiency of 1,000 different technologies working in perfect harmony. Representatives from 47 different species sat in their designated atmospheric pods, each maintaining the precise environmental conditions their biology required. The air itself was a carefully managed mixture that could support the breathing apparatus of the various delegates without poisoning any of them. Ambassador Zethka of the Vraxian Empire tapped her crystalline fingers against the smooth surface of her translation device, creating tiny musical notes that helped calm her nerves. As the current rotating chair of the Galactic Council, she had overseen first contact protocols with 17 different species over the past 2 centuries. It was routine work, usually involving careful negotiations about trade rights, territorial boundaries, and cultural exchange programs. Today felt different. The species requesting membership called themselves humans, and their application had been submitted from a small solar system in what the galactic charts classified as Sector 7G, a relatively quiet backwater region that most civilizations ignored. According to their preliminary data, they had achieved faster-than-light travel only recently, and had no previous contact with galactic civilization. Standard procedure, really. So why did Zethka feel like she was about to make a terrible mistake? The human delegation has arrived at Docking Bay 7, announced the Chamber's artificial intelligence in its perfectly neutral tone. Shall I escort them to the preparation chamber for the standard cultural briefing? Zethka glanced around the chamber at her fellow representatives. The Corthan delegate, a massive creature that looked like a cross between a bear and a crystal formation, seemed utterly bored. The Sistine representative was busy grooming her feathers, paying no attention to the proceedings. Even Ambassador Quill of the militaristic Draconian hegemony was reviewing trade reports instead of focusing on the new arrivals. No, Zethka decided, her decision surprising even herself. Bring them directly to the chamber. Let's expedite this process. The various delegates looked up with mild interest. Direct introduction without cultural briefing was unusual, but not unheard of for species that seemed obviously harmless. 15 minutes later, the massive chamber doors slid open with their characteristic whisper-quiet sound, and the human delegation entered. Zethka's first impression was how utterly unremarkable they looked. The humans were bipedal, roughly the same size as several other species in the chamber. They had a bilateral symmetry common to many evolved species. Their skin was a pale peachy color. They had hair growing from the tops of their heads, and they wore simple clothing that looked practical rather than ceremonial. Leading the group was a female who appeared to be middle-aged by their species standards, with graying hair and laugh lines around her eyes. "Greetings," the The lead human said, her voice clear and confident as it was translated through the chamber systems. I am Ambassador Sarah Chun, representing the United Earth Government. We are honored to address the Galactic Council. Standard diplomatic language. Zethkar relaxed slightly. Welcome, Ambassador Chun, Zethkar replied, following the traditional script. We are pleased to consider humanity's application for galactic citizenship. Please, tell us about your species and your intentions within the galactic community. Ambassador Chun stepped forward, and something in her expression made several of the delegates pay closer attention. There was a confidence there that seemed at odds with their primitive technology levels. We're explorers by nature, Chun began. Our species has always been driven to push boundaries, to see what lies beyond the next horizon. We've learned to work together despite our differences, though I'll admit it wasn't always easy. We've had our share of conflicts and mistakes, but we've managed to unite our planet under a single government dedicated to peaceful exploration and mutual cooperation. The standard application speech. Zethka began filling out the preliminary approval forms. What can your species contribute to galactic civilization? Asked Ambassador Thrain of the Stellar Commonwealth, a graceful being whose skin shifted through different shades of blue as he spoke. Chun smiled, and Zethka later would remember that smile as the first warning sign they all ignored. We're problem solvers, Chun said simply. When something doesn't work, we figure out a way to make it work. When we're told something is impossible, we tend to prove that wrong. It's gotten us into trouble sometimes, but it's also gotten us to the stars. Admirable, Thrain replied diplomatically. And what are your defensive capabilities? The galaxy can be a dangerous place for young species. We have some military vessels, Chun answered, though I hope we won't need them. We prefer to settle disputes through negotiation and compromise. More standard answers. Zethka was beginning to think this would be the most boring first contact in recent memory. Do you have any questions about galactic law or customs? Zethka asked, moving toward the conclusion of the preliminary interview. Just one, Chun said, and her smile widened. What happens when galactic law conflicts with what we consider basic rights? The chamber fell quiet. It was an unusual question, and several delegates exchanged glances. Galactic law is supreme. Ambassador Dorth of the Hegemony answered stiffly. All member species must abide by the collective wisdom of the Council. There are no exceptions. I see, Chun said, and she didn't look troubled by this at all. And what if we disagree with a particular law? Then you petition for change through proper channels, Zethka explained patiently. The process can take several decades, but all concerns are eventually addressed. Decades? Chun asked, raising her eyebrows. That seems like a long time to wait for justice. Justice is not always swift, Ambassador Quill interjected, his reptilian features showing mild irritation. Wisdom requires patience and careful consideration. Interesting perspective, Chun mused. We have a saying on Earth, justice delayed is justice denied. But I'm sure we can work out any differences that arise. The rest of the interview proceeded smoothly, and humanity was granted provisional membership in the Galactic Council with all the standard restrictions and probationary periods. They would be assigned a mentor species, given access to basic galactic technologies, and gradually integrated into the broader community. As the human delegation filed out of the chamber, Zethka felt that strange unease return. There had been something in Ambassador Chen's tone during those questions about galactic law, something that suggested the humans were not as compliant as they appeared. Harmless enough, Ambassador Thrain commented as the chamber began to empty. Another peaceful species looking for trade partners and scientific exchange. They'll probably never cause any significant trouble. Zethka nodded agreement, but privately she found herself hoping that was true. 3 months later, she received her first report about humanity's activities since joining the galactic community, and she realized just how wrong they had all been. The report came from Commander Salk of the Galactic Patrol, the organization responsible for maintaining order and enforcing laws throughout civilized space. Sock was a veteran officer from the militaristic Rigelian species, known for their efficiency and attention to detail. His report was marked as urgent. Ambassador Zethka, the recorded message began, "I need to discuss the humans with you immediately. They've been members of Galactic Society for exactly 93 standard days, and they've already managed to completely upend 3 different sectors of space." Zethka felt her crystal heart skip a beat. New species sometimes caused minor disruptions as they adjusted to galactic norms, but major incidents were rare. The first incident occurred in the Deneb system, Sock continued. The humans discovered that the local Carathian government was using slave labor to mine rare metals. When they petitioned the local authorities to end the practice, they were told it was legal under traditional Carathian law and therefore protected under the Cultural Preservation Act. Zethka knew the Cultural Preservation Act well. It was one of the fundamental laws of galactic society, designed to prevent stronger species from imposing their values on weaker ones. All member species were required to respect local customs, even when those customs were distasteful to outsiders. The humans, Sock's message continued, decided they disagreed with this interpretation of the law. A chill ran through Zethka's crystalline body. They organized something they called an economic intervention. Within 2 weeks, they had convinced 15 different species to stop trading with the Deneb system entirely. They then offered to purchase the contracts of every slave in the system at fair market value. When the Carathians refused, the humans simply landed on the mining worlds and started setting up competing operations using paid volunteer labor. Zethka stared at the recording device in horror. Direct interference with local government was strictly forbidden under galactic law. The Carathians complained to the Galactic Council, demanding that the humans be ordered to stop their interference. The humans' response was unusual. Ambassador Chun submitted a 40-page legal document arguing that the Cultural Preservation Act actually supported their position, since Earth culture considers slavery a fundamental moral violation, and forcing humans to ignore slavery would constitute cultural oppression of humanity. The twisted logic made Zethka's head hurt. Technically, Chun was correct. If cultural preservation was truly the goal, then humans had just as much right to follow their anti-slavery customs as the Carathians had to maintain their pro-slavery traditions. The Council is still debating the legal implications, Sock continued, but the immediate result is that the Deneb system's slave trade has completely collapsed. The Carathians have been forced to switch to paid labor, and their economy is actually more efficient now than it was before. The humans somehow managed to break galactic law while simultaneously making everyone involved better off financially. That was disturbing enough, but Zethka suspected there was more. The second incident, Sock said, confirming her fears, occurred when human traders encountered the Nexus Corporation's monopoly on medical supplies in the Outer Rim territories. The corporation had been charging extremely high prices for basic medicines, knowing that the isolated colonies had no other options. The Nexus Corporation was one of the most powerful economic entities in the galaxy, with political connections that reached into the highest levels of multiple governments. They were technically operating within the law, even if their practices were ethically questionable. The humans asked the corporation to lower their prices voluntarily. When Nexus refused, the humans reverse-engineered their entire medical supply line in 6 weeks and started giving away generic versions of the medicines for free. Zethka's blood froze. Reverse-engineering patented technology was a serious crime in galactic society, punishable by expulsion from the Council and complete trade embargo. When Nexus filed criminal charges, the humans produced documentation proving that every medication they had reverse-engineered was based on chemical compounds that had been discovered and patented by human scientists before Earth joined galactic society. They argued that Nexus had actually been stealing human intellectual property and demanded compensation for decades of unauthorized use. The legal mess that must have created would take years to sort out, but Zethka had a sinking feeling that the humans had somehow found a way to turn the situation to their advantage. Nexus has dropped their criminal charges, and agreed to lower their prices throughout the Outer Rim in exchange for humans dropping their countersuit, Saw confirmed. Somehow, in less than 2 months, the humans managed to break up one of the most profitable monopolies in galactic history. 2 major disruptions in 3 months was unprecedented, but Zethkar sensed that Sock had saved the worst for last. The third incident, Sock said grimly, involves the humans' response to the hegemony's military exercises in the Tau sector. The draconian hegemony's military exercises were legendary throughout the galaxy. They involved massive fleets conducting mock battles with live weapons, demonstrating the hegemony's military might to any potential rivals. The exercises were perfectly legal under galactic law, and they serve an important function in maintaining peace through strength. The exercises were taking place near several human colony worlds, Sock explained. The colonists complained that the military maneuvers were disrupting shipping lanes and making civilian travel dangerous. Ambassador Quill explained that the exercises were legal and necessary for galactic security, and suggested that the humans relocate their colonies if they were uncomfortable with the military activity. Standard military logic. Zethkar could see where this was heading, and she didn't like it. The humans responded by organizing their own military exercises. Zethkar felt her crystal structure actually crack slightly from the shock. They called it Operation Helpful Neighbor, Sock continued. 50 human vessels showed up in the Tau sector and began conducting what they described as humanitarian support exercises in exactly the same space the hegemony was using for their war games. The human ships followed all the same legal protocols the hegemony had used. They filed the proper paperwork, operated in international space, and claimed they were conducting legitimate training exercises. The only problem was that their exercises involved practicing emergency medical assistance, disaster relief, and civilian evacuation procedures. Zethkar tried to imagine the scene. Draconian warships practicing attack formations while human vessels practiced rescue operations in the same space. The implications were staggering. Every time a hegemony ship fired its weapons during a mock battle, human medical ships would immediately rush to the impact zone to practice treating casualties. When Draconian forces practiced planetary bombardment, humans would deploy to the surface to practice evacuation procedures. The humans were perfectly polite about the whole thing, but they made it impossible for the hegemony to conduct realistic military exercises. After 1 week of this, Ambassador Quill contacted the humans directly and told them to leave. The humans responded by asking why the hegemony was trying to interfere with their legitimate training exercises. They pointed out that if the Draconian forces weren't planning to actually hurt anyone, then humanitarian support exercises shouldn't be a problem. The twisted logic was unmistakably human, and Zethkar was beginning to understand why Sock sounded so concerned. The standoff lasted for 3 weeks, Sock concluded. The hegemony eventually canceled their exercises and moved to a different sector, claiming they needed more realistic training conditions. The humans declared their exercises a complete success and thanked the hegemony for their cooperation in the joint training program. The recording ended, leaving Zethkar alone with her thoughts and a growing sense of dread. In less than 3 months, humanity had managed to undermine 2 powerful corporations and force one of the galaxy's most feared military powers to back down from confrontation. They had done it all, while technically operating within galactic law, using the very rules designed to maintain order as weapons to disrupt the established balance of power. Worse, they had done it all with apparent innocence, claiming they were simply following their own cultural values and exercising their legal rights as galactic citizens. Zethkar realized that the Galactic Council had made a fundamental error in their assessment of humanity. They had assumed that a species was either powerful enough to challenge the established order or peaceful enough to accept it. They had never considered the possibility of a species that was both peaceful and utterly unwilling to accept injustice, regardless of whether that injustice was legal or not. As she prepared her report for the full council, Zethka found herself wondering what the humans would do next, and she realized that for the first time in her long diplomatic career, she was genuinely afraid of a member species. The humans hadn't threatened anyone. They hadn't broken any laws, technically speaking. They hadn't even been particularly aggressive. But they had demonstrated something far more dangerous than military might or technological superiority. They had shown that they were willing to completely ignore the unwritten rules that kept galactic society functioning, and they were clever enough to do it in ways that made them look like the reasonable ones. As Zethka sealed her report and sent it to the Council's emergency session queue, she couldn't shake the feeling that humanity's brief membership in galactic society had already changed everything, and there was no way to change it back. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened exactly 48 hours after Ambassador Zethka submitted her report. The Great Chamber buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from all 47 member species gathered to discuss what was already being called the human problem. Ambassador Quill of the Draconian Hegemony stood at the central podium, his reptilian features twisted into an expression of barely controlled fury. The scales along his neck had shifted to a deep crimson color, which everyone in the chamber recognized as a sign of extreme agitation. "Esteemed colleagues," Quill began, his voice carrying the distinctive hiss that marked his species' speech patterns. "We are facing an unprecedented threat to the stability of galactic civilization. In the 96 days since humanity joined our community, they have systematically undermined 3 major institutions that have maintained peace and order for centuries." Ambassador Chun sat in the human delegation's assigned section, looking remarkably calm for someone who was essentially being accused of galactic sedition. She wore the same simple clothing she had worn during first contact, and her expression was one of polite attention, as if she were listening to a mildly interesting lecture rather than a list of charges against her species. "The humans claim to be peaceful," Quill continued, "but their actions speak otherwise. They have destroyed the economic foundation of an entire star system, crippled one of our most important medical supply chains, and humiliated the hegemony's military forces in front of the entire galaxy." "With respect, Ambassador Quill," Chen interjected, her voice remaining perfectly level, "I think there might be some misunderstanding about our intentions." Quill's neck scales flared brighter red. "There is no misunderstanding about your methods, Ambassador Chun. You have weaponized our own laws against us." "We've simply exercised our rights as galactic citizens," Chun replied. "The same rights that every species in this chamber enjoys." "Rights come with responsibilities," Ambassador Thrain of the Stellar Commonwealth added, his blue skin shifting to deeper shades as his emotions intensified. "Your species seems to believe that your cultural values supersede galactic law." Chun tilted her head slightly, and Zethkon noticed that several other human delegates had the same expression. It was a look she was beginning to associate with humans preparing to say something that would make the situation much more complicated. "Actually," Chun said, "we believe our cultural values are protected by galactic law. The Cultural Preservation Act specifically states that no member species can be forced to violate their fundamental cultural principles. Everything we've done has been in accordance with that protection. Your interpretation of the Cultural Preservation Act is deliberately provocative," declared Ambassador Vorth of the Merchants Alliance, a tall, thin being whose species had controlled interstellar trade routes for over a millennium. "You're using legal technicalities to justify disruptive behavior." "Are we?" Chen asked, and Zethka felt her crystalline heart skip again. That tone was becoming familiar, and it never preceded anything good. Chun stood up, and suddenly every human delegate in the chamber was doing the same thing. It wasn't threatening exactly, but there was something unnervingly coordinated about the movement. "Let me ask the council a question," Chen said. "How many of you have laws against murder in your societies?" The question seemed to come from nowhere, and confused murmurs rippled through the chamber. "All of us, obviously," Ambassador Thrain replied. "Prohibition against killing members of one's own species is a basic requirement of civilization." "Good," Chen said. "And How many of you would be willing to stand by and watch while members of your species were murdered, even if the local government said it was legal? That's a ridiculous hypothetical, Quill snapped. Is it? Chen asked. Because from our perspective, that's exactly what you've been asking us to do. You wanted us to watch slavery happen and call it cultural preservation. You wanted us to watch people die from treatable diseases because of corporate profits and call it legal business practice. You wanted us to watch military forces intimidate civilians and call it necessary for security. The chamber fell silent. Zethka realized that Chen had just reframed every complaint against humanity as a moral choice rather than a legal issue. We're not trying to impose our values on anyone, Chen continued. We're just not willing to abandon our values to make other people more comfortable. If that's disruptive, then maybe the problem isn't with us. Your values are incompatible with galactic civilization, Ambassador Dorth declared. You cannot function within a society of laws if you reject any law that conflicts with your personal beliefs. Chun smiled, and Zethka realized with growing horror that the humans had been expecting this exact argument. Ambassador Dorth, Chen said pleasantly, does the hegemony still practice ritual combat to settle legal disputes? Dorth's reptilian features showed confusion. Of course, it is a fundamental part of our justice system. And the Stellar Commonwealth still elects leaders through emotional resonance testing. Thrain nodded proudly. Our empathic selection process has produced stable government for over 2,000 years. The Carathian Empire still uses genetic caste systems to determine social status. These questions were making everyone uncomfortable, though no one could quite figure out why. These are all protected cultural practices, Ambassador Vorth pointed out. The Cultural Preservation Act specifically, exactly, Chun interrupted. All of these practices would be considered violations of human rights if they happen on Earth, but we don't interfere with them because they're happening in your space, with your people, according to your laws. She paused, letting that sink in. But you're asking us to do more than just tolerate practices we disagree with. You're asking us to participate in systems that violate our fundamental values. You're asking us to pretend that slavery isn't slavery if you call it something else. You're asking us to watch people die and call it legal. This is exactly the problem, Quill said. Your species believes your morality is superior to everyone else's. No, Chen replied firmly. We believe our morality applies to us. We don't try to stop you from practicing ritual combat, but we won't participate in it. We don't try to change your genetic caste systems, but we won't respect them when dealing with your people. And we won't support slavery, monopolistic price gouging, or military intimidation, regardless of whether they're legal. The logic was unassailable, and that made it even more disturbing. The humans had found a way to remain technically compliant with galactic law while completely ignoring the spirit of that law. You're destroying the foundation of galactic society, Ambassador Vorth insisted. Order depends on everyone following the same rules. Are we destroying it? Chen asked. Or are we revealing that the foundation was built on compromises that we're not willing to make? Before anyone could respond, the Chamber's artificial intelligence announced an urgent communication from the Nexus Corporation's headquarters. Patch it through, Zethka ordered, grateful for any distraction from the philosophical minefield the discussion had become. The holographic display showed Corporate Director Nexus Prime, the artificial intelligence that had managed the galaxy's largest medical supply corporation for over 3 centuries. His digital avatar was clearly agitated, with status indicators flickering between normal blue and alarming red. Galactic Council, Nexus Prime began without preamble. I am transmitting an urgent report regarding recent human activities in Sector 15. The situation has escalated beyond our previous agreements. Zethka felt a familiar chill of dread. Please explain, Director. Following our compromise regarding medical supply pricing in the Outer Rim, we expected human activities to return to normal patterns. Instead, they have begun what they term educational outreach programs in 17 different sectors. The holographic display shifted to show star charts with human activity marked in bright red. The scope of their operations was staggering. Human medical teams are traveling to underdeveloped worlds throughout the galaxy. Nexus Prime continued, teaching local populations how to synthesize their own generic medications using locally available materials. They claim this is cultural exchange and educational assistance, both of which are explicitly protected activities under galactic law. That sounds like a positive development, Ambassador Thrain said carefully. It would be, Nexus Prime agreed, if they were teaching sustainable practices that maintain market stability. Instead, they are teaching complete pharmaceutical independence. Entire sectors are now capable of producing their own medical supplies without any corporate involvement. The economic implications hit the chamber like a shockwave. The medical supply industry was one of the pillars of galactic commerce, providing stable income for dozens of species and maintaining the economic balance that kept trade flowing between different regions. What is their stated goal? Zethka asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. They claim they want to ensure that no one dies from treatable diseases due to lack of access to medications. Nexus Prime replied. They have refused all offers of profit-sharing agreements and have declined to establish licensing fees for the techniques they're teaching. They're giving away the information for free? Ambassador Vorth asked in disbelief. Completely free, Nexus Prime confirmed. When we pointed out that this would destabilize the entire medical supply industry, their response was, and I quote, "Good. Maybe now you'll focus on developing new treatments instead of charging premium prices for old ones." The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. What the humans were doing wasn't illegal, but it was economic warfare on a scale that threatened the entire structure of galactic commerce. There's more, Nexus Prime added grimly. We've detected similar patterns in the technology sector. Human engineers are traveling throughout the galaxy, teaching advanced manufacturing techniques to any species that requests instruction. They're calling it industrial development assistance. What kind of techniques? Ambassador Dorth demanded. Fusion power generation, advanced material science, automated manufacturing systems, and quantum computation. All technologies that were previously available only through licensed agreements with major corporations. The silence that followed was deafening. The humans were systematically dismantling the technological dependence that formed the basis of galactic economic relationships. They're trying to collapse the entire galactic economy, Ambassador Vorth whispered. Actually, Chun said calmly, we're trying to build a better one. All eyes turned to the human delegation, and Zethkar realized that they had been listening to the corporate briefing with expressions of satisfaction rather than concern. A better economy? Ambassador Quill snarled. You're destroying billions of years of careful economic development. We're removing artificial scarcity, Chin corrected. The galaxy has the resources and knowledge to ensure that every sentient being has access to healthcare, education, and technology. The only thing preventing that is economic systems designed to maintain scarcity for profit. Profit provides incentive for innovation, Ambassador Vorth protested. Without economic motivation, progress stops. Does it? Chen asked. Because we've noticed that most of the innovations being sold throughout the galaxy are variations on technologies that are hundreds or thousands of years old. When was the last time any of your corporations developed something genuinely new instead of just finding new ways to package existing products? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Zethkar realized that none of the corporate representatives had an immediate answer. The humans are playing a dangerous game, Ambassador Dorth declared. They're assuming that their technological gifts will be used responsibly. As opposed to the current system, Chan replied, which assumes that artificial scarcity will be maintained responsibly. What happens when species develop weapons instead of medical supplies? Quill demanded. What happens when your industrial development assistance creates new military threats? Chin's expression grew serious for the first time in the discussion. That's a fair question, and we've thought about it carefully. Every species we're working with gets the full package. Technology, infrastructure, education, and ethics. We don't just teach people how to build fusion reactors. We teach them how to build societies that use fusion reactors responsibly. You're teaching ethics? Ambassador Thrain asked incredulously. We're sharing perspectives, Chen corrected. We tell them what we've learned about the long-term consequences of various technologies and social systems. We share our failures as well as our successes. Then, we let them make their own choices. And if they make bad choices? Chen shrugged. Then, they deal with the consequences, same as everyone else. But we found that when people have genuine access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunity, they usually make pretty good choices. Usually, Cool repeated ominously. Nothing's perfect, Chen admitted. But we'd rather deal with the occasional bad decision made by informed people than maintain systems that guarantee bad outcomes for everyone except the people who benefit from those systems. The debate continued for hours, but Zethka could see that the fundamental issue wasn't really about specific policies or legal interpretations. The humans represented a completely different philosophy about how galactic society should function, and that philosophy was spreading. As reports continued to flow in from throughout the galaxy, the scope of human influence became clear. They weren't just disrupting individual institutions. They were systematically undermining every system that maintained the current balance of power. Slave-based economies were collapsing as humans demonstrated that free labor was more efficient than forced labor. Corporate monopolies were dissolving as humans shared advanced manufacturing techniques with developing worlds. Military intimidation was becoming ineffective as humans taught defensive technologies to potential victims. None of it was illegal. All of it was catastrophically disruptive. The humans are reshaping galactic civilization, Zethka realized with growing alarm. They're not trying to conquer us. They're trying to save us. And somehow, that was far more terrifying than any military threat could have been. The session ended without any resolution because there was no legal way to stop what the humans were doing. They had turned the very laws designed to protect galactic diversity into tools for revolutionizing galactic society. As the various delegations filed out of the chamber, Zethka overheard Ambassador Chen talking quietly with one of her aides. How long before the resistance movement start? The aide asked. They've already started, Chen replied. But that's okay. Change is never easy. And some people are going to fight to preserve systems that benefit them. The important thing is that we've planted seeds. Seeds. Ideas, Chen explained. Once people know that slavery isn't inevitable, that disease isn't unavoidable, that technological advancement doesn't have to be restricted to the wealthy, those ideas don't go away. Even if they stop us tomorrow, the ideas will keep spreading. Zethka felt her crystal heart crack a little more as she realized the full implications of what she had just heard. The humans hadn't accidentally become a threat to galactic civilization. They had deliberately set out to transform it, and they had done it so cleverly that by the time anyone realized what was happening, it was already too late to stop. They had weaponized hope itself, and there was no defense against it. 6 months after the emergency session, Ambassador Zethka stood in her private quarters aboard the council station, staring out at the vast expanse of stars that had once seemed so orderly and predictable. The galaxy looked the same as it always had, but she knew that everything had changed in ways that were only beginning to become visible. Her crystal structure had developed several new stress fractures over the past weeks, a physical manifestation of a strain she was experiencing as reports flooded in from every corner of galactic space. The humans hadn't slowed down their educational outreach programs after the council session. If anything, they had accelerated their efforts. A soft chime announced an incoming priority transmission, and Zethka reluctantly activated her communication array. The holographic display showed General Corthex of the Hegemony Supreme Command, his reptilian features even more agitated than usual. Ambassador Zethka, Corthex began without preamble. We have a situation that requires immediate council intervention. The humans have crossed a line that cannot be ignored. What have they done now, General? Zethka asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. They've started teaching defensive military technologies to client species throughout the hegemony's traditional sphere of influence, Cortex replied grimly. 3 of our protectorate worlds have informed us that they no longer require our military protection services. The implications hit Zethka like a physical blow. The hegemony's protectorate system was one of the fundamental structures of galactic politics, providing security for smaller species in exchange for tribute and political support. If that system collapsed, it would create a power vacuum that could destabilize entire regions. What kind of technologies are they teaching? Zethka asked. Planetary defense shields, automated defensive satellites, and something they call distributed manufacturing systems that allow small worlds to produce their own military equipment. Cortex's voice carried a note of professional respect despite his obvious anger. The technologies are actually superior to our standard defensive packages. Superior how? They're designed for protection rather than projection of power, Cortex explained. The weapon systems are optimized for defending against invasion rather than conducting invasions. The shield generators can repel most conventional attacks, but they can't be used offensively. The manufacturing systems can produce defensive equipment quickly, but they're configured in ways that make producing offensive weapons much more difficult. Zethka felt a chill of recognition. Once again, the humans had found a way to be disruptive while maintaining the moral high ground. They weren't teaching smaller species how to become aggressive. They were teaching them how to become unconquerable. What was their justification for this assistance, she asked. They claim it falls under the educational exchange provisions of galactic law. Cortex replied, with visible frustration. When we pointed out that military technology transfers require council approval, they argued that they weren't transferring weapons. They were teaching engineering principles and providing manufacturing equipment. The actual weapons are being built by the protectorate worlds themselves, using knowledge that humanity considers to be basic educational content. Another legal loophole exploited with devastating effectiveness. Zethka was beginning to suspect that the humans had studied galactic law more thoroughly than most council members. There's more, Cortex continued. The humans have been conducting what they call cultural exchange visits with the populations of these worlds. They've been sharing stories about something called the right to self-determination and discussing the historical experiences of small nations that successfully defended themselves against larger powers. They're spreading revolutionary ideology, Zethka realized with growing alarm. Exactly, but it's ideology disguised as historical education, which is explicitly protected under the Cultural Exchange Act. The humans are teaching these species that they don't have to accept client status, that they can defend themselves, and that independence is possible. The communication was interrupted by another priority signal, this one from Corporate Director Valen of the Intergalactic Mining Consortium. Zethka reluctantly accepted the transmission, splitting her display between the military and corporate representatives. Ambassador Zethka, Valen began immediately. The human situation has reached critical status. They've begun what they're calling environmental restoration projects on 17 mining worlds throughout our operational sectors. Environmental restoration? Zethka asked, though she suspected this would be just as problematic as everything else the humans had been doing. They're teaching local populations how to clean up the environmental damage from our mining operations, Valen explained. They're providing advanced terraforming technologies and showing these worlds how to restore their ecosystems while maintaining mineral extraction operations. That doesn't sound particularly threatening, Zethka said carefully. It wouldn't be if they were working within our existing agreements, Valen replied. But they're teaching these techniques to the planetary populations directly, not to our corporate representatives. The local governments are now claiming that our mining rights are invalid because we violated environmental protection clauses that were included in the original contracts. Zethka felt another stress fracture develop in her crystal matrix. Environmental protection clauses that weren't being enforced? The clauses were considered ceremonial, Valen admitted reluctantly. Standard legal language that no one expected to be interpreted literally. The humans have been analyzing our contracts and finding environmental obligations that have been ignored for decades. And now the local populations know how to enforce those obligations, General Cortex added grimly. Because the humans have given them the technology to clean up the damage and the knowledge to do it themselves. Worse, Valen continued, the humans are teaching these worlds how to extract their own minerals using environmentally sustainable methods. They're providing mining technologies that are more efficient than our current operations and produce less environmental damage. The scope of what the humans were doing was staggering. They weren't just disrupting individual industries. They were systematically empowering every exploited population in the galaxy. What do they want? Zethka asked desperately. Surely they're making demands in exchange for all this assistance. That's the problem, Cortex replied. They don't want anything except for people to make their own choices. Every species they help is free to continue their existing agreements, modify those agreements, or terminate them entirely. The humans don't benefit directly from any of these changes. They must have some agenda, Valen insisted. No species invests this much effort without expecting something in return. Another priority signal interrupted the conversation, and Zethka found herself adding Ambassador Quill to the communication array. His neck scales were cycling through multiple shades of red, a sign of extreme emotional distress. The situation has escalated beyond acceptable parameters, Quill announced without preamble. The humans have begun interfering directly with hegemony internal affairs. How? Zethka asked, though she was almost afraid to hear the answer. They've established what they call refugee assistance programs along our borders with the Stellar Commonwealth, Quill explained through gritted teeth. They're providing transportation, temporary housing, and resettlement assistance to any citizen of the hegemony who wishes to relocate to Commonwealth space. The implications were immediately clear to everyone on the communication channel. The hegemony's rigid social hierarchy depended on citizens accepting their assigned roles within the system. If people could simply leave when they were unhappy with their treatment, the entire foundation of hegemony society would be threatened. They're calling it humanitarian assistance, Quill continued bitterly. They claim they're helping people exercise their right to freedom of movement, which is supposedly a fundamental sapient right according to human philosophy. Have they been encouraging people to leave? Zethka asked. That's the insidious part, Quill admitted. They haven't encouraged anyone to do anything. They've simply made it known that assistance is available for anyone who chooses to relocate. They provide information about opportunities in other regions of space, but they emphasize that the choice belongs entirely to the individual. How many people have taken advantage of this assistance? General Cortex asked. Over 2 million in the past month, Quill replied grimly. And the numbers are accelerating. Entire family groups are relocating, including many individuals with specialized skills that are essential to our industrial base. Why don't you simply prohibit emigration? Valen suggested. Because freedom of movement is protected under the individual rights charter that the hegemony signed when we joined the Galactic Council, Quill explained with obvious frustration. The humans researched our legal obligations more thoroughly than our own legal department. Zethka realized with growing horror that the humans had once again found a way to weaponize galactic law against the very institutions that law was designed to protect. There's something else, Quill added reluctantly. The humans have begun offering what they call mediation services to resolve internal disputes within the hegemony. They claim it's cultural exchange, sharing human conflict resolution techniques with anyone who's interested in learning about them. Mediation services? Zethka asked. They teach people how to negotiate with authority figures, how to organize collective action, and how to resolve disputes without violence. They call it democracy education, and they claim it's simply sharing information about human social systems. They're teaching revolution, General Cortex said bluntly. They're teaching people that they have options, Quill corrected grimly, which amounts to the same thing. The communication was joined by yet another priority signal, this time from Ambassador Thrain of the Stellar Commonwealth. His blue skin was cycling through dark, agitated patterns that indicated significant stress. "Colleagues," Thrain began, "I need to report that the human influence has reached the Commonwealth as well, though in ways we didn't anticipate." "What's happened?" Zethka asked, though she was beginning to feel like she was trapped in some kind of cosmic nightmare, where every solution created new problems. "The humans have been studying our empathic leadership selection process," Thrain explained. "They've expressed great interest in our emotional resonance testing and have asked for detailed information about how we identify individuals with strong empathic abilities." "That seems like a reasonable cultural exchange," Valen commented. "It would be, except that they've begun teaching our techniques to other species," Thrain replied. "They're calling it emotional intelligence education, and they're sharing our empathic training methods with any civilization that's interested in learning them." The implications took a moment to sink in, but when they did, Zethka felt her crystal structure develop several new fractures. "They're teaching other species how to identify and develop empathic leaders," she realized. "Exactly," Thrain confirmed. "Species that have never had access to empathic guidance are suddenly capable of selecting leaders who genuinely understand and care about their population's emotional needs. It's creating political revolutions throughout their territories. But those revolutions should benefit the populations involved," Zethka pointed out. "They do," Thrain agreed, "which is exactly the problem. When populations have leaders who genuinely care about their welfare, they become much less willing to accept exploitative agreements with outside powers. The humans are systematically undermining every form of exploitation in the galaxy," General Cortex said with grudging admiration. "Economic, political, military, environmental. They've found ways to empower the victims while maintaining legal protection for their activities." "What can we do?" Valen asked desperately. "There must be some way to stop this before they destroy the entire galactic order." "Actually," came a new voice, "maybe that's exactly what needs to happen." Everyone turned to see that Ambassador Chun had joined the communication channel without being invited. Her expression was serious, but not apologetic. "Ambassador Chun," Zethka said stiffly. "This was a private communication between council members." "I know," Chun replied calmly. "But your communication systems are surprisingly easy to access when you understand human information technology, and I thought you might benefit from our perspective on this situation." "Your perspective?" Quill snarled. "You're the cause of this situation. We're the catalyst," Chin corrected. "The situation existed long before we arrived. We're just making it impossible to ignore anymore." "Explain," Zethka demanded. "Every problem you've described involves populations who are being exploited, oppressed, or taken advantage of by more powerful groups," Chun said simply. "The hegemony's protectorates were paying for military protection they didn't actually need. Mining worlds were having their environments destroyed for corporate profit. Client species were being kept dependent on systems that benefited their patrons more than themselves. Those were stable arrangements," Ambassador Vorth protested. "They maintained peace and order throughout the galaxy." "They maintained inequality," Chin corrected. "And inequality is inherently unstable. It only looks stable when the people being exploited don't have any other options." "So you decided to give them options," Zethka said. "We decided to share our knowledge and let people make their own choices," Chin replied. "If those choices are disrupting existing power structures, maybe those power structures needed to be disrupted." "You're destroying galactic civilization," General Cortex accused. "We're transforming it," Chin replied firmly. "The question is whether you want to be part of that transformation or whether you want to fight it." "And if we fight it?" Quill demanded. Chin's expression grew sad. "Then you'll lose, and the transformation will happen anyway. But it will be more violent and chaotic than it needs to be." "You're threatening us," Valen accused. "We're warning you," Chin corrected. "We've studied galactic history, and we've seen what happens when established powers try to resist inevitable social change. The transformation happens either way, but resistance makes it bloody." "What do you want from us?" Zethka asked. Help us make the transition as peaceful as possible, Chen replied. Work with us to build systems that actually serve everyone instead of just the people who currently benefit from inequality. Be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. And if we refuse? Chen shrugged. Then you become irrelevant. The galaxy is changing whether you participate or not. The only question is whether you adapt or get left behind. The communication channel fell silent as the implications of Chen's words sank in. Finally, Zethka asked the question that everyone was thinking, but no one wanted a voice. How do we know you won't just replace our forms of oppression with your own? For the first time since joining the conversation, Chen smiled. Because we're not trying to rule anyone. We're trying to make it impossible for anyone to rule anyone else. Every tool we've shared, every technique we've taught, every system we've helped establish is designed to make populations more independent, not more dependent on us. That's not sustainable, General Cortex protested. Galactic civilization requires coordination and hierarchy. Galactic civilization requires cooperation, Chen corrected. Hierarchy is just one way to achieve that, and it's usually not the best way. As the various representatives signed off the communication channel, Zethka found herself alone with her thoughts and a growing realization that humanity had already won this conflict before anyone else realized there was a war happening. They hadn't conquered the galaxy through superior force or cunning manipulation. They had done something far more devastating. They had made conquest itself obsolete by teaching everyone how to be unconquerable. The old galactic order was dying, and there was no way to save it. The only choice left was whether to help build something better or watch everything collapse in chaos. And as much as Zethka hated to admit it, the humans were right about one thing. The transformation was inevitable now. The only question was how much of the galaxy would survive the transition. 2 years after first contact, Ambassador Zethka stood in what had once been the Galactic Council chamber, now transformed into something the humans called a coordination center. The massive space still housed representatives from hundreds of species, but the formal hierarchy and rigid protocols have been replaced by something that looked more like controlled chaos. Small groups of beings clustered around holographic displays, working together to solve problems that range from resource allocation disputes to technological development challenges. The translation systems have been upgraded with human-designed improvements that didn't just convert words, but helped communicate the emotional and cultural context behind those words. Arguments still happen, but they seem to resolve more quickly and with less lasting resentment. The changes had not come easily. The transition period had been marked by several crisis points that had pushed galactic civilization to the brink of collapse. But somehow, humanity's prediction had proven correct. When people were given the tools and knowledge to solve their own problems, they generally chose cooperation over conflict. Zethka's crystal structure had finally stopped developing new stress fractures, though the existing ones had become permanent reminders of the most turbulent 2 years in galactic history. She was no longer the rotating chair of the Galactic Council, because that position no longer existed. Instead, she served as a cultural liaison, helping species navigate the complex process of adapting to a galaxy where exploitation was no longer profitable and cooperation had become the primary survival strategy. Ambassador Zethka came a familiar voice, and she turned to see Sarah Chun approaching with her characteristic calm smile. Chen's hair was grayer now, and she moved with the careful precision of someone who had been working too hard for too long. But her eyes still held the same quiet confidence that had so unsettled Zethka during their first meeting. Ms. Chun, Zethka replied, using the title Chun had requested after the formal diplomatic protocols had been abandoned. I've been reviewing the latest reports from the former hegemony territories. The transition appears to be proceeding more smoothly than anyone predicted. People adapt quickly when they're given genuine choices, Chen replied. Ambassador Quill deserves most of the credit, actually. Once he decided to work with the changes instead of fighting them, he became one of our most effective coordinators. It was true. though Zethkar still found it difficult to believe. Quill had spent nearly 6 months in what humans called denial, insisting that the hegemony's traditional power structure would reassert itself once the novelty of human interference wore off. But when several client species had simply declared independence and successfully defended themselves using human-taught defensive technologies, Quill had been forced to acknowledge that the old system was gone forever. To everyone's surprise, including his own, Quill had proven remarkably effective at helping former hegemony territories establish cooperative defense networks. His military expertise, when applied to genuine protection rather than intimidation, had made him indispensable to species that had once feared him. What about the economic transitions? Zethkar asked. The last reports showed some significant disruptions in the outer territories. Growing pains, Chen acknowledged. When you eliminate artificial scarcity and monopolistic practices, there's always a period of adjustment while new systems develop. But the overall trends are positive. Production is actually higher than it was under the old system, and the benefits are distributed much more widely. That was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the transformation. Despite all the predictions of economic collapse, the galaxy's overall productivity had increased dramatically once the bottlenecks created by corporate monopolies and exploitative agreements had been removed. When species had access to advanced technologies and manufacturing capabilities, they produced far more than they had when they were dependent on outside suppliers. Director Nexus Prime has been particularly helpful in establishing the new medical distribution networks, Chun continued. Once he realized that corporate profits weren't the primary goal anymore, he became very creative about optimizing healthcare delivery. The artificial intelligence's transformation had been one of the most unexpected developments of the entire period. When the medical supply monopolies had collapsed, Nexus Prime had initially threatened to shut down operations rather than operate at a loss. But humans had convinced him to consider alternative operational parameters, and he had discovered that maximizing health outcomes was actually more intellectually interesting than maximizing profits. Nexus Prime now coordinated a galaxy-spanning medical network that had reduced preventable deaths by over 90% while operating at a fraction of the cost of the old system. There's something I've been wondering, Zethkar said carefully. Your species seemed to know exactly what would happen when you began your educational outreach programs. Did you plan all of this? Chun tilted her head slightly, that familiar expression that indicated she was about to say something that would reframe Zethkar's understanding of the situation. We plan to share our knowledge and values, Chun replied, but we didn't plan the specific changes that resulted. We couldn't have, because those changes had to come from the species involved. We just provided tools and information. What people did with those tools was up to them. But you must have had some idea of the likely outcomes. We had hopes, Chen admitted. We'd seen similar patterns in human history, situations where giving people better options led to better outcomes. But we also knew there was a significant chance that everything would go badly wrong. You were willing to risk galactic civilization on a hope? Zethkar asked incredulously. We were willing to risk the existing system to give people a chance at something better, Chen corrected. And, frankly, the existing system wasn't working very well for most of the galaxy's population. The risks of change had to be weighed against the certainty of continued exploitation. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority communication, and Chun activated her personal display. The holographic image showed a young human male with excited eyes and disheveled hair. MS. Chun, the young man, began immediately. We're getting reports from the Andromeda contact team. They've made successful communication with 3 new species, and the initial cultural exchange is going remarkably well. Chen's expression brightened. That's wonderful news, David. Any interesting developments? One of the species has what appears to be a collective consciousness, but it's voluntary. Individuals can join and leave the collective at will, and they maintain their personal identity while contributing to group decision-making. Another species has developed biological technology that integrates living organisms into their manufacturing processes. and the third species communicates primarily through controlled electromagnetic emissions. Fascinating, Chen replied. Make sure our linguistic teams have all the support they need for developing communication protocols. And remember, we're there to learn and share, not to teach or fix anything. Understood, David replied. Oh, and Miss Chun? One of the species asked specifically about something they'd heard called the human approach to interspecies relations. Apparently, word about our methods has spread beyond our own galaxy. After David signed off, Zethka stared at Chun with a mixture of awe and concern. You're expanding beyond our galaxy? Not expanding, Chun corrected. Exploring. We've always been explorers, remember? And there's so many species out there that we could learn from. And that you could teach, Zethka added pointedly. And that we could learn from, Chun emphasized. Every species we've encountered has taught us something valuable. The Vraxians taught us about crystalline information storage. The Korthans showed us how to integrate biological and technological systems. The Rigelians helped us understand the mathematics of multidimensional space. But you also taught them about self-determination and cooperative problem-solving. We shared our perspectives, Chen replied, just like they shared theirs with us. The difference is that some perspectives are more easily weaponized than others. A thought occurred to Zethka that made her crystal structure vibrate with sudden understanding. That's why other species find humans frightening, isn't it? Not because you're aggressive or technologically superior, but because your ideas are infectious. Chun considered this for a moment. I think compelling might be a better word than infectious, she said finally. When people are given genuine choices, they tend to choose freedom over oppression, cooperation over exploitation, and dignity over survival. Those aren't uniquely human values, but humans have gotten pretty good at creating systems that support those values. And now you're spreading those systems throughout the universe. We're sharing what we've learned, Chun corrected gently. What others do with that information is up to them. Another communication signal arrived, this time from Ambassador Quill. His reptilian features had lost much of their previous aggressiveness, and his scales had settled into a calm green color that indicated contentment. Ms. Chun, Ambassador Zethka, Quill began, I want to provide an update on the Outer Rim Defense Initiative. The network is now fully operational, with 47 species contributing resources and expertise. We've successfully deterred 3 potential conflicts through coordinated defensive positioning, and we've resolved 12 territorial disputes through the mediation protocols you helped us develop. Excellent work, Quill, Chen replied. Any challenges we should be aware of? Actually, we've encountered an interesting situation, Quill continued. The Zirian Empire has been testing our defensive network with increasingly aggressive patrol patterns. They seem to be trying to find weaknesses or gaps in our coverage. The Zirions weren't part of the original galactic community, Zethka observed. They're from the far rim territories beyond our previous contact range. Exactly, Quill confirmed. They've built their civilization around conquest and expansion. They seem to be having trouble understanding why our defensive network doesn't have any offensive capabilities. Chen's expression grew thoughtful. Have they made any direct threats? No, but their patrol pattern suggests they're planning some kind of probe or test. They may be trying to determine whether our defensive posture is genuine or whether we're hiding offensive capabilities. What do you recommend? Chen asked. I think we should invite them to observe our defensive exercises, Quill replied, surprising everyone. Show them exactly how our systems work and demonstrate that we really are focused on defense rather than projection of power. That's a remarkably trusting approach, Zethka commented. It's a remarkably human approach, Quill corrected with what might have been amusement. I've learned that transparency and trust are often more effective than secrecy and intimidation. After Quill signed off, Chun turned to Zethka with an expression of satisfaction. That's probably the best example of how much things have changed. 2 years ago, Quill's first instinct would have been to respond to the Zirian probes with a show of force. Now he's thinking about how to build trust and understanding. Is that always the right approach? Zethka asked. What if the Zerions interpret transparency as weakness? Then, we'll deal with that situation when it arises, Chen replied calmly. But, in our experience, most conflicts stem from misunderstanding and fear rather than genuine incompatibility. When people understand that you're not trying to hurt them, they're usually willing to consider peaceful alternatives. And if they're not, Chen's expression grew serious. Then, we protect ourselves and anyone else who needs protection. But we do it in ways that minimize harm and preserve the possibility of future cooperation. Even with species that are fundamentally aggressive. Especially with species that are fundamentally aggressive, Chen replied. Aggression usually stems from fear or past trauma. When you remove the sources of fear and provide alternatives to violence, most aggressive behaviors fade over time. A new communication signal arrived, this time showing multiple participants in what appeared to be an emergency coordination session. Representatives from dozens of species were visible on the display, all speaking at once in obvious excitement. Ms. Chun called out a familiar voice, and Zefka recognized Dr. Yanni of the Altarian Research Institute. We need to report a breakthrough in our consciousness transfer research. The collaboration between human neuroscience, Vraxian crystalline storage, and Rigelian dimensional mathematics has produced results none of us expected. What kind of results? Chen asked. We've successfully developed a method for temporarily sharing consciousness between individuals of different species, Dr. Yanni explained. Participants can experience life from another being's perspective, including their sensory inputs, emotional responses, and thought patterns. The implications were staggering. Zethka could imagine how such technology might revolutionize interspecies understanding and cooperation. Have you tested it? Chen asked. Preliminary trials have been extremely successful, Dr. Yanni confirmed. Participants report dramatic increases in empathy and understanding after even brief sharing experiences. We believe this technology could eliminate most forms of interspecies prejudice and conflict. It could also be incredibly dangerous if misused, Chen pointed out. Absolutely, Dr. Yanni agreed, which is why we're implementing the ethical protocols you helped us develop. All research is being conducted with full transparency, voluntary participation, and extensive safeguards. After the research team signed off, Zethka turned to Chun with a mixture of admiration and concern. Every time I think I understand the scope of what you've started, she said, something new emerges that makes it even more far-reaching. That's the nature of exponential change, Chen replied. When you give people the tools and knowledge to solve problems, they don't just solve the original problems. They use those tools to develop new tools, which they use to solve problems you didn't even know existed. Aren't you concerned about losing control of the process? We never had control of the process, Chen pointed out. And that's the whole point. The goal isn't to control what happens. It's to make sure people have the ability to make good choices about what happens. But what if they make bad choices? Chen shrugged. Then they deal with the consequences and learn from their mistakes. That's how growth happens. A soft chime indicated that the day's coordination session was ending, and beings throughout the chamber began gathering their materials and saying their goodbyes. The informal, cooperative atmosphere was so different from the rigid protocols of the old council sessions that Zethka sometimes forgot this was supposed to be the same organization. Ms. Chun, she said as they prepared to leave, I have one more question. Of course. Are humans truly not afraid of anything? Because sometimes it seems like your species approaches even the most dangerous situations with complete confidence. Chun smiled, and for the first time, Zefka saw a hint of vulnerability in her expression. We're terrified most of the time, Chun admitted. We're afraid of making mistakes, of causing harm, of not living up to our ideals. We're afraid that the changes we've helped start will spiral out of control, or that we'll accidentally destroy something irreplaceable. Then, why do you keep pushing forward? Because being afraid isn't a reason to stop trying to make things better, Chen replied. Fear is just information. It tells you what might go wrong, so you can try to prevent it. But If you let fear make your decisions for you, you never accomplish anything meaningful. As they walked toward the chamber exit, Chen added quietly, "Besides, we've learned something important over the past 2 years." "What's that?" "We're not alone in this anymore. When we first arrived in galactic society, we were trying to figure out how to share our values without imposing them. Now we're part of a community that's actively working together to build something better. The responsibility isn't just ours anymore." "Is that a relief?" "It's the best thing that's ever happened to us," Chen replied with genuine warmth. "We always believed that cooperation was better than conquest, but now we have proof. When different species work together, sharing their knowledge and perspectives, the results are better than anything any of us could have achieved alone." As they reached the exit, Zethka realized that her initial assessment of humanity had been both completely wrong and perfectly accurate. They were indeed the most feared species in the galaxy, but not because they were dangerous. They were feared because they had made hope itself into a weapon, and there was no defense against hope except to embrace it. "Ms. Chun," she said as they prepared to part ways, "what do you think the galaxy will look like in another 10 years? Chen paused, considering the question seriously. "I think it will be more connected, more cooperative, and more creative than anything we can imagine right now. I think species that have never had contact will be working together on problems that none of them could solve alone. I think individuals will have opportunities and choices that their parents couldn't have dreamed of, and the conflicts, the problems that seem intractable, I think most of them will turn out to have been caused by artificial scarcity and systems that pitted people against each other unnecessarily," Chen replied. "When those systems are replaced with cooperative alternatives, the conflicts usually resolve themselves." "You make it sound simple." "Simple isn't the same as easy," Chen clarified. "Building cooperative systems is hard work, and it requires constant vigilance to prevent them from being corrupted by people who want to use them for personal advantage. But the basic principle is simple. When people have what they need and feel secure in their position, they're generally willing to help others achieve the same thing." As Zethka made her way back to her quarters, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that first day when humanity had applied for galactic citizenship. She had gone from being a minor diplomatic functionary in a rigid hierarchy to being a cultural liaison in a dynamic, growing network of cooperative species. The work was harder because cooperation required constant communication and adjustment, but it was also more meaningful because she could see that her efforts were contributing to something larger than maintaining the status quo. Her personal communication device chimed softly, and she saw that she had received a message from her family on the Vraxian homeworld. They wanted to know when she would be visiting, and they mentioned that they had enrolled in one of the human-sponsored cultural perspective programs. Zethka smiled as she realized that even her own family was being influenced by humanity's approach to interspecies relations. They were learning to see their own culture from different perspectives, and they were excited about the possibilities that created. As she prepared for sleep, Zethka thought about Chen's prediction for the next 10 years. A more connected, cooperative, and creative galaxy seemed like an impossible dream, but then so had the peaceful transformation of galactic society that was happening all around her. Perhaps impossibility was just another form of artificial scarcity, and humans had found a way to eliminate that as well. In the end, Zethkar realized humanity had become the galaxy's most feared species not because they conquered worlds or built terrible weapons, but because they had done something far more dangerous. They had made everyone believe that a better future was possible. And once people believed that, everything else became inevitable.